I really appreciate all the viewer engagement on this channel and all the time that people take to comment on different aspects of the videos and live streams that we do. And I have not done one of these in a long time, but I wanted to take a moment to record a little response to some of the comments, or to sort of highlight some of the comments on recent videos. And so I'm going to share my screen and we'll go through a selection of them. So here we go. So these are just sort of a number of comments that I have selected, and they're in no particular order, but I just took comments from the last, I don't know, 5 or 10 videos and pulled out some that I thought were worth highlighting. This one is from a guy in his room, and I just thought this is a nice comment. This is kind of self-congratulatory of me to feature this one first. And like I said, this is in no particular order. These are random, but I just thought this was really nice. He says, I haven't listened yet, but I just love how open this channel is, because many woke critical people end up knee-jerk taking one side on issues. I'm way more interested in weighing many sides, not taking one and being dogmatic either way. I really appreciate this comment. This is something that I really try to do, and I'm glad that this is coming through. I really do think it's important to be considerate around issues and try not to fall into polarization. So thank you very much. This next one, oh, I didn't even say which one this was, this previous comment. It was on the video called A Civil Dialogue about autogynephilia with Shannon Thrace and Phil Illey. So this next one is on that same video. And actually, it looks like I selected 3 different comments. So CalmOnGround says, this reminds me of the argument that a woman ought to be able to walk the streets nude at midnight. Do we get to dictate how people dress? Do we get to dictate people's responses to how we dress? Lavender Rose Loves Women 891 said, well, this wasn't very radical or very centered at all. Could your guest's agenda here be more transparent? If AGP is such an inwardly focused orientation, then why isn't practiced at home in private? Why does it always require the reaction of shock and disgust in female targets in order for the AGP to get his satisfaction? Why does the AGP always claim that the public not participating in his inwardly focused orientation causes him distress? Your guests were totally incoherent and profoundly dishonest. The best therapy starts with radical honesty. What about all the research on how exhibitionism is an important component in this extremely public paraphilia? And so this comment, I wanted to include some of the critical ones. There were a lot of really critical comments around this particular topic, and they continue to come in. I continue to see new ones. This person, I think, is making some valid points, and also you can see that it's really an emotional topic, and there's a lot of emphatics like profoundly and totally, and then the all caps. And so you can see that this is really a troubling issue for a lot of people, and I want to be sensitive to that. And I also want to be sensitive to the guests who really put themselves out there. So I actually did go through and delete a couple of comments, and actually banned a couple of people from posting, or hid them from the channel, I guess, because some of them were really quite abusive. I mean, and you can take exception to that word if you want, but they were really pretty nasty. This is an example of somebody who's upset, but I understand what they're trying to express. And this is kind of comment that I welcome. Just please go ahead and share your thoughts, and I'm glad to be able to engage with this. I can't really speak to AGP very much. You guys probably know about as much about it as I do at this point. This isn't something we talked about when I was in school. It's something that I'm learning from listening to other people talking about it. But I do think that it's important to be able to engage with these topics openly and not to shut people down and shame them, especially if, as some people are asserting, this is what's really going on for a lot of young men who are looking into gender transition. So it's a big topic and it's very fraught. So it's very difficult. Thank you for taking the time to comment. And then we have, after that one, we have Guy, LO3LD, says, thanks for having Phil on and discussing this taboo and very misunderstood topic. It's fascinating how the most loud trans activists don't want people like Phil to speak on what he classifies as a sexual orientation. There is no doubt that many people feel like him, but they repress their urges completely and live extremely closeted lives. So you can just see kind of the contrast there. Lots of big feelings around that topic. It looks like I've got one more on that same one. Let me see. So this one is by Super Birdsong on that same video. This cannot be a man's attraction to the self as a woman, since no man can know what it is like to be a woman. It can only be an attraction to the self in relation to the paraphernalia of being a woman, hence the interest in women's clothing and mannerisms. These things relate to gender rather than sex. Since gender is a hierarchy which places women in an inferior position, I wonder if it is the self as a degraded person that is the attraction for these men. An actual woman is independent of this paraphernalia, yet autogynephiles are inordinately interested in them. It is a way of imagining that one is having a relationship with a woman without having anything to do with any actual women. And I thought this was interesting, and a lot of people gave it a thumbs up on the channel, so seems to be something that's struck a chord with a lot of people. So yeah, just thought I would highlight that because it seemed like an interesting take. So thank you very much, Super Birdsong. And now this is on a comment on fatness in libraries, cultivation of victimhood and weaponization of empathy with Jenny Rogers. Come on, man 3639 says, as a recovering librarian, I can assure you that librarians are not only large, but also completely unhinged. Librarianship is the wokest of all professions, which is why I left the field. The library where I used to work still has a BLM banner up in November 2023. Now that's almost comical language, but and pretty emphatic. But I have heard that it is pretty woke, pretty social justice oriented libraries. I've heard from a number of librarians, and it does seem. I guess it caught me a little bit by surprise, but then it's kind of education adjacent. So we've got a lot of that right there in that field. Thank you very much for the comment. This is a comment on social justice counseling as malpractice with Erin Kinsfater and Susanna Alexander. Liberality says, Erin made a really interesting point about libidinal energy turning into rage. Activists are so confused about healthy relationships between men and women that their energy is being used for hatred of the other instead. I just found this to be a really interesting concept, interesting comment. Thank you very much for highlighting that, Liberality. Thanks for the comment. This comment is on the same video. And Sarah Samson 5922 says, I was a sociology undergrad in the mid to late 80s and saw the beginnings of this ideology, then political correctness. In my early 20s, not directly out of high school when I started, I lived with my partner, 15 years older and a Vietnam veteran. I had some evening classes with older students and valued their perspectives and comments about how the topics at hand related to their current work experiences. But what I valued most of all was my partner telling me not to take any blank from professors because you're paying their salary. Not being exclusively surrounded by my cohort and groupthink ultimately saved me from indoctrination and a sociology-based career. So that's really interesting. I thought that was a valid thing to point out, the cohort-based groupthink mentality, and that being, by continuing to be exposed to people outside of that bubble, Sarah feels like she was saved from falling into that groupthink. So thank you very much for your comment and for telling us that story, Sarah. All right, this is another comment on fatness in libraries, cultivation of victimhood and weaponization of empathy with Jenny Rogers. And this is actually a little series. So Belissa Cohen, oh yes, this one. This person left a lot of comments here, and then also on Twitter, just like really was upset about these videos. I don't know. At least I think this is the person. So sorry, Belissa, if it's not you, but I think it is you. I enjoyed the discussion of fatness in libraries. However, you lost me toward the end at trans people. What you are essentially saying is that if people are so far down the rabbit hole and are that dissociated from their bodies, unlike people who perform their life in a fat body, to the extent that they cut off functional body parts / add non-functional body parts or take other extremely harmful iatrogenic measures to make it appear to others that they are in the opposite sex body, you're perfectly willing to support their delusion by declaring them a separate category of human, a trans person, rather than continue to acknowledge reality for them and for everyone else. Just totally ridiculous. You both know as well as anyone, especially anyone who is at GenSpect and has absorbed as much material as you both have, that no one is trans, not one person. It is a complete mythology and a harmful one at that. And then I responded back to Belissa, there's no such thing as true trans, but there are people who have made choices to alter themselves cosmetically to represent themselves as the opposite sex. Trans people is a linguistic label for such people. I don't like to give lengthy disclaimers every time I speak, so this well understood label is easy to use and efficient. And then Belissa says, disagree. Every time you use the phrase trans people rather than clear, accurate language, you reify a falsehood. Go ahead and do what you like, of course, but I consider people who perpetuate a falsehood out of convenience, linguistic laziness, or not wanting to appear mean to be part of the problem. If people, especially people like the two of you who have a platform, stopped reifying the lie that there's a special category of human who falls into the special category called trans, and instead referred to these medicalized men and women without using the nonsense ideological terms of the gender industry, that industry would wither away far sooner, and thus far fewer vulnerable people's lives would be destroyed. Be the change or do what's easy, your call. And I think Bullis is making some good points. I think that there's validity in what she's saying. I'm assuming it's a she because it sounds like a female name. I guess I just don't. I feel more strongly about courtesy towards other people than I guess using people as opportunities to influence them or other people. And so I am not going to use my relationships with others to try to impose my worldview on them or on anyone else. I just don't want to be that transactional. And so if a person has invested themselves in this cosmetic process and it's important to them, I will use my judgment on a case-by-case basis, but a lot of times I will refer to them the way that they're attempting to appear. And to me, the phrase trans people, it makes sense. I do agree with a lot of the criticisms of gender ideology. I really do end up at the end of the day seeing it as an issue mostly of elective cosmetic body modification. And I think that we have a lot of serious medical ethics questions to answer around that. And there's a lot of interventions that are being done without good evidence for them. And, that's a long conversation that we could go into at some point, but whether I will use that phrase or not, I think that that's quite simple. I think it makes sense to a lot of people, but I appreciate you taking the time to really write out your disagreement, and I respect your position on this. So thank you very much for that. And if you're not the person who was going after me on Twitter, then I apologize for calling you out, because maybe you're not, but I thought it was your name. Anyway, thanks very much for your comment. Okay, here's another one on a civil dialogue about autogynephilia with Shannon Thrace and Phil Illey. Lisa Duval says, I was at the conference. As a woman, I was not at all threatened by Phil. I want our society to be enlightened enough for people to wear whatever they want. It didn't feel like he was wearing his fetish garb in front of us, and I really do believe him when he says that, even though dressing like a woman is part of his sexual orientation, he is not constantly aroused when he does. He did not force himself into women's spaces. He did not claim to be a woman. However, as an ROGD parent, I did find part of his appearance there upsetting. My child is female to male, so I can only imagine that the parents of male to female children who have medically transitioned and who are estranged would have been even more upset by his presence and presentation. Here's the thing, though. If he were saying that the condition of AGP should never lead to medicalization, then I think he would be a huge advocate and actually be reassuring for parents. But he is saying that if he could pass as female, he would medically transition, thus indirectly or even directly advocating for childhood medical transition and treatment with puberty blockers. He does acknowledge that it might be difficult to discern what child is AGP and what child is gay at a young age, but he does seem to suggest that there is a possibility of this distinction and therefore a valid green light to childhood medicalization. That is the main issue for me, just like I wouldn't have an issue and didn't have an issue with female to male transitioners there who are saying that medicalization probably isn't right for the vast majority of, if any, childhood or ROGD onset of gender dysphoria. I would find it hopeful to have self-proclaimed AGP individuals as part of the dialogue and mission to stop harmful medicalization of anybody's inner sense of themselves. It should be society that changes in terms of regressive stereotypes, misogyny, and misandry, harmful porn, impossible standards of beauty, etc., 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 rather than people needing to dangerously change their bodies in response to society. Thank you very much, Lisa, for that considered and thorough comment. Thank you for that perspective. And then the next one is the same on the same video. Scatterbrained 1457 says, I give Phil credit for researching AGP for the past 100 years, and as an AGP, trying to figure out what it all means to help others like himself have a better chance of figuring themselves out. Anybody could have done this at any time, as the scholarship was there, but Phil was the one who was motivated to try to put all the pieces together. I call that brilliant, and I think it will have an impact on the discussion at hand. Okay, thank you very much, Scatterbrain, for your comment. Okay, this one, and again, these kind of sorted themselves into the order that they're in when I clicked on the screenshots. So sorry for bouncing around a bit, but comment on fatness in libraries, cultivation of victimhood, and weaponization of empathy with Jenny Rogers. Alex Lindstrom 555 says, just listen to this podcast. I can say I've benefited from some aspects of body positivity and intuitive eating, basically about leaving dieting behind, but still paying attention to your body's cues. In that essence, it's still about nutrition. I'd say the health at every size philosophy probably has decent points. But what I eventually saw was vicious rebellion against diet culture, which, yes, I can see why, but don't stay there, and glorifying fatness. I had joined an intuitive eating group, and it seemed to be more about not triggering the creator of the group rather than sharing experiences and making peace with food and feeling better in your own body. It went off the rails. I'm currently losing weight, but it's with the comforting understanding that all foods are available to me without guilt. I just need to pay attention to my body and what it craves, usually mostly nutritious food, and have some play food on the side. Thank you, Alex, for this perspective. I think I've heard a lot about this or not a lot, I guess, but a little bit. I guess I've started to be aware of this more recently, and it's pretty interesting what's happening within the, I guess, the body positive or fat liberation or the whole nutrition movement. It seems like there's quite a bit of complicated stuff going on there. So thank you for this piece of personal insight. All right, this is a comment on a Solid Ground episode that we call Divided Families, Divided Selves. CalmOnGround 962 says, great conversation. I'm at the 42-minute mark and listening to the discussion of coddling the trauma. This is so much where I'm working to shift how to be with someone who is suffering so that it doesn't become the identity. A year ago, I read an article about the evolution of having been a victim. When we have been victimized by someone or some event, we had this placed on us. It is optional to shift to having the perspective of being a survivor, which shifts our focus from what happened to how I am now, and then transgender. How would I like things to be? That takes me to the work that Ian Rowe is doing around education and agency. His mission is to help students to become architects of their own futures. Thanks to all of you. It's really nice to listen to your calm, thoughtful, reflective words, and I'm looking forward to joining your group. I'm not sure if I followed all of that, but I liked a lot of what you had to say there. And then it looks like Deborah Knox is responding here. We'd love to have you join our groups. I think the fine line on what you mentioned is acknowledging there has been some sort of actual traumatic experience that activated survival programming, say the freeze response, that has led the person to respond to current things or stressors in their environment in a less optimal way, while also helping them get support to resolve. And then she goes on, but I cut that off. I didn't mean to do that. And then it's just a nice interaction here. CalmOnGround says, agrees with her and says, there's no option on being a victim, and that has to be addressed, witnessed, and acknowledged. And from there, people have choice. I'm thinking of somatic experiencing. So I thought this was a good interaction, and I liked the points. And yes, CalmOnGround, join us, please. Maybe you already have, and I just don't recognize your screen name, but yeah, thank you for your comment. And I have quite a few here, so maybe I'll skip a little bit. I'll skip around. Here's one on, this one was on porn, our children and ourselves, with Jody Shaw, Jenny Holland, and Amelia Cataldo. And this person, ADIN2XU, says, if you remove the exploitation of woman out of it, what is someone supposed to do if you are someone who has never been able to find a partner, say the entirety of their life? And I said, I think that's a really good question. It's true that porn exploits women and impacts both men's and women's views about women's bodies, as well as sex in general. But I also believe porn is harmful to the men who use it. And it could even be argued that its primary harm is to men. It damages your ability to connect to other people, both men and women, and can decrease the likelihood that you'll be able to engage in a successful partnership. It also creates a self-stimulation loop that can impact the development of other aspects of yourself and your life. Oh, and it looks like I cut off my own comment there. Celibacy that isn't chosen is unfortunate, but it's a fact of life for many people. And I said something about the contemporary attitude about the necessity of sex in our lives. And then the commenter says, is desire entitlement or nature? And I said, desire is nature, but access to sex is not a given. And this contemporary culture has a warped relationship with that, in part through the extreme proliferation of graphic sexual imagery. And one's desires can be managed to some extent through behavior and focus, controlled or exacerbated, etc. So I know this is a controversial topic, and I welcome feedback on this. So what do other people think about this? And thank you very much, AD, for your comment. Here's another one on that same video about porn, our children and ourselves. And this person, Brandon 1902, says, firstly, Google Analytics has revealed that girls now consume near as much as boys, primarily on smartphones. This is confirmed by arousal studies that found not only that women were just as responsive to videos, but a broader spectrum of videos aroused women versus men. So it isn't even remotely an issue specific to men. And they, let's see, this one gets a little bit more graphic, so I'll try to skip over that. Older generations of women didn't masturbate less or watch less porn. They simply used fantasy more. There's no fundamental difference between imagining and seeing an erotic scene. And for over 99% of human history, men also used fantasy instead of porn, since it wasn't available. And I think this is a really good point to talk about. And I think that there's a massive difference between imagery and viewing erotic pornography. And, you know, with your own imagination, you can only go so far. You can go as far as you want, but you can only feed yourself what you already have and maybe stimulate that. But with porn, what we see is an escalation through into more and more shocking content, as the need to be shocked and surprised is part of that dopamine reward circuit. And then they talk about sex toys and motorized tool usage. Let's see. So the combination of porn consumption and motorized tool usage is having a much more profound negative impact on real world capacity for pleasure and connection for women than men. It just stick out more when it happens to men because failure of the man performing stands out. But the truth is, women are failing to reach heightened states of pleasure, not just, with partners for the same reason men are. So that's interesting. I'd be interested in what people think of this. I think that that's a topic that I'd never given any consideration to, the idea of motorized tools. So Amelia brought that up in our discussion, but I wonder if that goes hand in hand with the flooding of sexual imagery. This is a comment from a video called Promoting Resiliency in a Culture of Victimhood with Dr. Eddie Waldrip. And this is 14 Doc Murph. It says, I recently finished my master's in social work and just got my LSW and LIC. It's so refreshing to hear this man speak. I'm also a combat combat medic, I have also been bewildered by the fields of psychology and social policy. Although I love to hear intellectuals beautifully articulate the points both participants do so eloquently in this conversation, my instinct is to go at it in a much more confrontational and aggressive kind of way. It's not that I disagree with the critical type ideologies. It's that they're batshit crazy and it's tearing at the foundation of Western civilization. And I would like to avoid the horrors that are on the way if we don't correct course. Thank you very much. And I'm glad you finished your master's and good luck in your field. This is a comment on the live stream I did last week with Christine Siefan called Antioch is Woke, where we featured a recent graduation speech or speech by the chancellor at a graduation ceremony. Long Machine says, I am so thankful I left my CMHC program. The long-term effect from exposure to this very harmful race and gender ideology would have destroyed my attitude toward anyone who isn't a straight white male. I was only in the program for approximately 12 months, and it still damaged my attitude. I got accepted to a different program at an out-of-state public institution, so I really hope my new program hasn't been infiltrated by woke ideology. I looked at the curriculum and even found the code of ethics and at first glance didn't see anything that suggests woke. I'm still very nervous, however, because I am uprooting my life in order to pursue this program and career. I only wanted to help people solve problems in their lives, no matter their sex or race. Honestly, I still attend weekly therapy, and every time I mention the woke ideology and my thoughts towards it, there seems to be an awkward moment in the exchange. Of course, maybe that's just me in my own head. The funny thing is, my therapist attended the very same small private school I was at for my CMHC program. My therapist even had the same theories professor. The theories professor, by the way, is a wonderful person and instructor. I'm considering stepping away from therapy for a while because I don't trust it anymore. Anyway, you ladies are both lovely and great conversation. Long Machine, I'm really sorry to hear that. That sounds really stressful. And when you say that it really has impacted your attitude toward anyone who isn't a straight white male, that's kind of the backlash that I've been saying. This is such an obvious thing. You're going to do this to people when you teach in this particular way. You're going to end up poisoning people against each other, and that impact is really real. I hope you're able to connect with friends or maybe somebody at school when you get into the new one, or a new therapist that you can really talk to, or maybe that you can actually broach this with your therapist and see what that awkwardness is that's coming up. Maybe it's a really difficult topic for this therapist, but who knows what they think. Obviously, if they've been educated recently at a school where you were encountering this, there's a very good chance that they're thinking along these lines, but they also might be intimidated around these topics and not know how to really talk about it. So anyway, thank you very much for your comment and best of luck to you. All right, let's see. This is a great comment by the pragmatist, and I'm wondering if I'm taking so long that I should skip ahead, but I encourage you all to pause and give this a read. I thought it was a really, really good comment. Thank you so much for sharing your story, the pragmatist. All right, this one is back to the conversation with Dr. Eddie Waldrip. And Daughter of Earth says, I think if the client wants to talk about some aspect of their identity which is holding them back, they should be allowed to explore that in therapy. For example, if I wanted to talk about the patriarchy and some of the supportive messages of radical feminism, I should be able to do so. Resilience isn't everything. Sometimes society is to blame for some of our woes. Life is not all about individual agency, and culture can change how we act, and culture can be changed. Many things are not necessarily biologically determined. We should be able to question normative behavior between the sexes. I don't go along with cis, of course. And Daughter of Earth, I think you're also making a really good point. It's true that we are impacted by social forces that are outside of ourselves, and we should be able to address that in therapy. You're right. And if you have just a focus on your own personal agency, maybe that could leave you feeling unsupported in areas where you really are frustrated or have been hurt by forces outside of yourself. So yes, I do think that you should be allowed to explore that in therapy. Absolutely. So thank you for your comment. All right. Now this is from the conversation we just had on Solid Ground this week, White Splaining with Jen and Deb. And Nuck Nuck says, I think it's time for us to lose the term anti-white and substitute it for anti-liberal. The liberal arts are what's under assault. Truth, honesty, merit, method, optimization, equality, equal opportunity need to be dismantled so that equity, equal outcomes, may reign. The liberal arts is a product of Western Europe, and clearly the descendants of Western Europe are melanin poor, okay, white. The progressive left's problem with equality is that it allows failure and desperate and unequal outcomes. And how's the far left going to fix that? Through far left totalitarianism power via equity. And as we all know, equity can only be achieved through oppressing the achievers while lifting up the failures. And history demonstrates once that is executed, starvation begins and lives are lost. Combating equity is literally a matter of life and death. Thank you very much for that comment, Nuck Nucks. I like that anti-white substitute for it, anti-liberal. All right, let's see. Okay, this one I read a comment earlier by Sarah Samson, so I guess I have a second one. I wasn't really paying attention to who they were by, but thank you, Sarah, for another comment. Thanks for this post. This channel always gets me to see different perspectives I wouldn't have thought of. One thing I have thought of, paying for all this. This is on a Solid Ground stream we did called When Your Kids Tell You They're Trans. She says, one thing I have thought of, paying for all this. What would happen if these medical and surgical procedures were not reimbursed by insurance companies and one had to pay out of pocket? Maybe this could be resolved by the insurance companies. It's an interesting comment. I mean, it's an interesting thought. I do think that it would be very different if they weren't being reimbursed by insurance or by sometimes the state insurance as well, which is going to be your tax dollars. I wouldn't suggest that insurance companies could be the good guys necessarily. I would ask why they would be involved in this. What would they be getting out of this if they're reimbursing for this? So yeah, my experience with insurance is not, I don't have a positive view of that industry. So I'm going to go ahead and stop there because it feels like it's been kind of long and I don't want to exhaust everybody, but I'd like to do another one of these soon because I just really appreciate the comments and the engagement. And thank you all so much for watching and for taking the time to be involved in this conversation. Thanks. Have a great night.